he is actually directing the lives of people like rivers. Okay? We read earlier on in Acts chapter 17 that God made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determines the time set for them, the exact places where they should live. So, we have a purpose. We have a reason to be here. So in 1991, we had elections. And lo and behold, we had a peaceful election. We had a change of government, which in Africa up to then was a very rare occasion. Okay, very rare. Because most of the changes of government were overthrows, were revolutions, were, the armies taking over, all kind of different scenarios. And Zambia was sticking out as an example, as a shining example. Changing a government with peaceful means, just with a vote on the ballot, okay? Going to the voting booth, putting this piece of paper there, and we changed the government peacefully, okay? If you would think, or you would have thought at that time that this is a one-time occurrence, think again. Because 20 years later, it happened again, okay? This time it was no longer UNIP. This time it was MMD. Okay, and again, the people went to the voting booth and they decided, we don't want to be blue anymore, let's go for green. Okay, and again, we changed in a peaceful way, not only government, but from one party, from one ruling party to a new ruling party. Okay, and again, we did it peacefully. And we have done it again this year. Okay? So now we have built a legacy. We have built something very powerful. So, I believe Zambia has got something to talk about. We are a shining example, not just in Africa, but even in the world. Look at how democracy is being abused, even it has given every nation in a very unique, then they get lesser authority, whether they are a chief, they get more authority, whether they are, a president or a king, of course they have greater authority. But ultimately, the final authority is he himself. Okay, we must never forget that. A nation may only have its own interest in mind. Okay, and that's very often the problem, Nations are seeking their own interests. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that per se. But we should not be selfish, even as a nation. We should always seek the good of the world. Okay, we should always be a shining example to everybody else around us. Like Zambia has been, in terms of democracy, we are a shining example to the whole world. Okay, isn't that powerful? So yes, we are having certain manifestos, and every party comes up with their plans, with their manifestos, and that is okay, but we must never be selfish, self-centered. We must always realize we are part of the family of nations, and we are under God. Now God builds all nations to fulfill his magnificent plan. And since only God knows the overall plan of all the world and all the nations of the world, he is the only one who can really set the directions for all the nations of the world. Because, he has a plan that most of the nations may not be aware of. That's sometimes where the problem is. We're trying to push our agenda. Meanwhile, God has a greater agenda which we have not fully grasped in the way we live. So remember, God is the one who has an overall plan for the world and for all nations. And that's why we must always compare notes with that plan. Are we in line with that plan? When we write a manifesto in our personal lives, in our family, in our nation, we should always compare, is this in line with what God has in mind for us? Because if we don't, then we are going to be sidelined, because God will then separate the goats from the sheep and say, you